He spent almost half a century in and around universities as an undergrad and then graduate student, a professor, director, dean, vice provost, and eventually president of Victoria University at the University of Toronto. So if anyone has an idea about how to make our post-secondary institutions better, it ought to be Paul W. Gooch. His new book is called Course Correction, a map for the distracted university. And it brings Paul Gooch to our studio tonight. Nice to have you in that chair.
Thank you, Steve.
Let us find out, first of all, in your subtitle, a distracted university. Why would universities be distracted today?
When you're distracted, you're thrown off your main sense of purpose, the mission that you're given to do. The universities these days have internal conflicts and stresses as they try to cope with so many students who are coming. They have external stresses through government expectations that we're going to somehow fix all the problems of the world. There are expectations of parents. There are problems in trying to staff with part-time people. There are many, many distractions that cause the university to think not so much about its mission, but about how it's going to get through the next couple of weeks.
Okay, distractions from the main mission. And the main mission for universities is what?
The main mission has to do with knowledge. And I keep wanting to stress this, that the universities are a place to know. So I don't think in our lovely province, the presidents of universities should have on their license plates open for business. I think they should have a place to know. And universities are a place to know in two senses. First of all, they're a place where you get to know. You get to know subjects, you get to know how to live a good and meaningful life. But they're also places to know because they should be places where society is coming to find out what's happening in universities.
So if somebody comes up to you and says, President Gooch, I want to go to this university because I think it will help me get this job.
Right.
What's your response to that?
My response is, good, I hope it does, but what about the next job you're going to have? What about the job after that? Because very few of us have one job throughout our careers. So you should be choosing your university because it's going to help you be a more fulfilled and useful person with many, many abilities that are going to be helpful for society.
There actually, and I'm going to read an excerpt from the book here, because there are other reasons to go to university which people may not even appreciate nowadays. Sheldon, if you would, let's bring the graphic up, and here we go. The university experience, you write, provides special opportunities for social bonding with others, often very different social and cultural places with whom one discovers unexpected affinities. Marriages are made on campus. So universities are about socializing, friendship forming, and the discovery of life partners. I wonder if we are so focused on what's the job I'm going to get at the end of my degree that we've completely forgotten about this other side of the coin.
Well, that is a very, very important observation, Steve, because if you're focused only on the job and you only want that piece of paper, you don't get involved in the richness of a university experience. I had a student who came to see me to pick up a paper, and we got talking, and I discovered that she had spent more hours in transit than in class in a week because she lived north of the city. So she was on the bus more often than she was in class. She had hardly the opportunity to get to know other people and to meet a life partner. So university is more than just going into the classroom and getting that piece of paper at the end. It is this whole experience, as you point out, and perhaps you might yourself understand how you might meet a life partner at university.
Well, it is interesting that you put it that way, because in an age when so many people are picking up their university education online, you say in the book that architecture matters a lot. How come?
How come? Because the pursuit of knowledge, the critique of knowledge claims, these are the most fundamental activities that we can do as a society. Unless we do that, we're at the mercy of demagogues, of unarticulated assumptions. So the pursuit of knowledge is a fundamental human activity. We have great architecture when it comes to courthouses, to public buildings, because we value a judiciary, we value a good government. We should be valuing the pursuit of knowledge and expressing that in our architecture.
I think you said it in the book, actually, that what helped you choose your university was that you wanted to go to a place that actually looked like a university.
That looked like a university, indeed. Yeah.
So tell me this then, Athabasca University,
right.
The University of Phoenix, they have no campuses.
Right.
They give out degrees. They have thousands upon thousands of students. Are they universities?
Are they universities? Well, they are universities insofar as they convey knowledge, assess knowledge, and certify knowledge.
They have no campus, though.
But the experience is not a university experience, as far as I'm concerned. I thought of that student who was on the bus so often. I thought, why doesn't she just stay home and have her parents slide pizza under the bedroom door, and she could become educated, never leaving her bedroom? There's something impoverished about that view of education.
On the other hand, you do say in the book there are some advantages to, I think you call it placelessness. What would the advantages be?
The advantages would be that if you have and I would say it works best for professional education. If you're a nurse in Northern Ontario, online learning would be very, very good for upgrading your credentials. But for a basic undergraduate education, you need to have someone who cares about you as a person and knows how you think and helps you to think more better and more correctly.
No substitute for being there, is there?
No.
In some cases, yeah. Okay, I want to get into some discussion here about how independent universities ought to be from governments. Because on the one hand, he who pays the piper calls the tune.
Right.
And governments have certain expectations of universities, given that they're putting billions and billions into our universities. What's the appropriate amount of interference a university ought to put up with from the funder?
Right. Well, I think the university ought to be accountable. That's the fundamental principle here. The university ought to be accountable to government and to society for the way in which it conducts its business and spends their money.
Accountable means what, though?
Accountable means, first of all, transparency, so that everyone understands what's going on, how decisions are made, what the priorities are. But accountable in that sense and for financial matters. I think when it comes to academic content, there is something that is so precious that government should not interfere. And I like to compare this to the courts and to the press. We would not put up with a government that interfered with judicial decisions. And we've come close to that in some areas and some parts of the world. And we would not like a press that had to refrain from criticizing government. So we need universities to have the same kind of freedom or autonomy for the sake of pursuing knowledge, but also because universities are the places where judges and politicians and newspaper people and media people are educated.
Okay, let me, for argument's sake, push back a bit on that.
Yep.
If you read the Constitution of the country, the judiciary is mentioned, freedom of the media is mentioned.
Right.
I don't think anything's in there about universities. Are you entitled to make that argument and put universities on as high a plane as those other two things?
I'm making the argument. Whether I'm entitled to depends on some debate here. But yes, there are freedoms of expression, freedoms of belief, freedoms of conscience. And I think that universities are the places where those freedoms are expressed, but also cultivated.
If the government were to come to you when you were head of Victoria College, let's say the Minister of Colleges and Universities came to you and said, Paul, we think you're doing a great job here, but you really ought to be teaching more of this and less of this. What should your response have been?
My response would have been, why? And we could have a conversation about it, but in the end, it would have to be the decision of the university about what it taught. If the government was making a good argument that we were neglecting some important area, that would be something that we'd have to think about.
But at the end of the day, you're the decider.
At the end of the day, the curriculum must be decided by the university. Who teaches must be decided by the university. What is taught has to be decided by the university. The conditions of granting the degree must be decided by the university.
Or else what? What's lost if that's no longer the case?
What's lost is the reputation and integrity of the institution. Why would you believe the claims of a university if it was being influenced unduly by government, by donors, by religions? So the integrity of the knowledge claims of the university and its certification of what students have learned, that requires autonomy.
You talk about interference, and one of the things that the government recently interfered in, the government of Ontario that is that it made a decision that it thought university ought to be cheaper. Right. And so they forced a 10% tuition cut on all the post-secondary institutions in Ontario. What did you think of that move?
Not much, and students didn't think much of that move either. And for the first time, Steve, I saw students saying, wait a minute, that's going to interfere with the quality of our education. And that is a very, very important statement on the part of our students themselves.
Who doesn't want cheaper tuition?
Exactly. But who wants an education which is compromised and inferior?
And you think that's going to result as a result of this tuition cut?
Universities are going to have to scramble to make up. And what you do is you pack in more students, and the quality of their experience suffers.
So the attempt to make university cheaper, more affordable, which is how the government is putting it, you think will have a perverse outcome? Have I got that right?
I think it's quite likely. Now, universities are pretty ingenious, and they're going to do their best. But
there we are.
There we are.
Let me do another excerpt from the book because university campuses are supposed to be, at least they always have been, places where free speech is kind of important. And you talk about this in the book, so let me read this excerpt. Free expression will call prejudice to account even if it must shock to do so. Bland speech might not offend, but it might also mask injustice. Civil discourse must sometimes be provocative discourse. Universities must be places where freedom flourishes, for there is no better place to explore and determine what civil discourse actually is. This is, of course, a great debate that's happening in society now, has been for years and years and years. Where do we draw the line between provocative but acceptable speech and hate speech?
Well, there's a definition of hate speech, and universities have to abide by the laws of the land when it comes to hate speech and not permit it. But I think the fundamental thing about freedom of expression in universities is that no one can interfere with the freedom of expression of someone else. So if you shut down an event by pulling the fire alarm or other
protesting, shouting them down,
the whole thing, then that interferes with someone's freedom of speech. I don't think that means that universities have to invite every strange idea to be promulgated in their space. But having thought about what is provocative in society, universities have to be the places where freedom of expression is not only permitted but cultivated, and then there should be rigorous debate and informed discussion.
There are many professors and students today on campuses all over North America who want the freedom not to be offended by what they would consider to be offensive speech. What do you think of that?
What do I think of that? I understand nobody likes to be offended, and I think we should not go out of our way to offend others. But at the same time, if an issue is fundamentally important to society and to even a small minority, then we ought to be able to listen and to create situations of respectful discourse even when it might be unpopular.
There are many, I would suggest, conservatives who are watching this program who think that universities are biased against them, who believe that conservative speakers have a tougher time being allowed to come on campus and speak. In your experience, is that the case?
In my experience, no, it's not the case. One of the distractions the universities face is the noise from south of the border, where this is a very big issue. There are some instances in Canada where this has happened, but in my experience, universities are places where conservative and liberal voices can be heard.
Although, I've also seen stories, for example, where they've said, sure, university administration might say, sure, you want to have this very provocative right-wing speaker come to our campus? That's great. Here's the bill for $50,000 for security, and, welcome. And of course, they have to cancel because they can't afford the bill. So is there, what do you think? That doesn't sound kosher to me. What do you think?
I would agree with you. I think that there are subtle ways of shutting down speech, and we ought not to do that.
Doug Ford's government has said that unless there is freer speech on campus, and by that I think he means unless conservative voices are respected as much as liberal voices are, he thinks, respected, he'll withhold transfer payments to universities. Your view on that?
My view is, first of all, I think we need evidence that conservative voices are not being heard. And second, withholding transfer payments is a way of shutting down someone else's speech, right? So I think it's internally inconsistent.
I want to ask you about cheating. And you talk about this in the book. Yes. There is a lot of cheating going on university campuses all over the world these days. The most recent scandal, of course, in the United States was nicknamed Varsity Blues,
yes.
which you folks at U of T may not have loved, but
no.
Given that all your sports teams are named that. But, we saw rich parents purchasing SAT tests and, having scores faked and exams written and all of this kind of stuff. Does this happen in Canada?
I would say it does not happen in Canada. We are not as focused on very elite institutions in that way. I think we do have a problem of access for people who don't believe that they could come to university, but there is a great deal of financial support available for people who otherwise couldn't afford a university education in Canada and in Ontario in particular. The cheating to get your student, your son or daughter into university is a subversion of the very integrity of the institution, and it must not be countenanced. So I think that it's important that universities have strong policies on academic integrity, and I'm happy to say that in my own institution, the policies are strong and they are enforced.
There will be a lot of skeptical people watching this right now who will say, come on, Professor Gooch, if I came to you and said, I'm going to make a $100,000 donation to Victoria College so you can finally put air conditioning in one of those old buildings of yours, but of course the condition is, my son's got a 65 average, which isn't enough to get in, right. But you're going to let him in. You going to turn him down?
Steve, I had a parent come to me, international parent, and make a similar kind of claim, and I said, if your son meets the standards of the University of Toronto, we'd be very happy to have him. And I'm happy to say he met the standards of the University of Toronto.
Okay. I am curious, though. What did you think of the code name that they use in the United States, Varsity Blues?
Well, it's catchy, but it doesn't work here.
I want to finish up on this because Henry Kissinger had maybe the most famous line about post-secondary institutions ever, where he said the politics on university campuses are so brutal because the stakes are so small. First of all, what did he mean by that, do you think?
I think he meant that the disputes and wrangles within universities are petty. It's whether you liked my article or not, or whether I gave you an appropriate citation, or whether I said something nasty in a review of your book. I think that's what he meant. But of course, as I say in the book, when I related that story to someone, and I was asked, well, what is the reputation that's at stake? I realized that universities live and die by their reputations. So it's very important that universities have a reputation for integrity. for the proper pursuit of knowledge. That's why it's important that they admit students, that they hire people, that they tenure them or promote them, that they have a curriculum well developed on proper academic grounds.
You have spent half a century in this world. Are you glad you did?
Steve, there is no better life. I have been so privileged to be able to spend my life, not just in research and writing and thinking about Plato and education, but in working with fabulous colleagues and in particular in reaching out to young people. So I've never been able to decide whether I preferred teaching or research or administration. But I would say that the most satisfying part of my job has been working with the next generation. And I'm deeply concerned about them. When I asked my students this year, what are you going to do about the world? We've made a mess of it. Good luck with it. What concerns you? And one of them said, it's a lack of hope. And another said, it's apathy among my generation. Our young people need to come to universities to learn how to have hope and to create a better future. There's no better vocation than working with them.
That's a pretty good mission statement for universities right there. I want to thank you for coming into TVO tonight and remind everybody the book is called Course Correction, A Map for the Distracted University. Paul W. Gooch has been our guest. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.